Okay, good afternoon, Ivan, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Austin Cullen, I represent CBC Longstand, and tonight I'm here to tell you why this House should not ban money wage. So far we've been hearing a lot from both the prop and the op about the economic side of the argument, but I don't think that's important. I'm going to talk about the moral reasons for why we keep the minimum wage, and the moral reasons for the moral repercussions of taking it away. So, to begin, a commonly asked question: what gives value to life? What gives meaning to life? Well, the answer, ladies and gentlemen, is choice. It's the ability to make decisions, the ability to be free, the ability to make decisions that will influence your future life. But since we are living in a system of organized government, our right of choice is obviously hindered. We must pay tax, we must adhere to laws. But in this democratic republic, the government has the responsibility to maximize the choice that we have left. For example, and we see them doing this every day, for example, they provide free education to all, giving everyone the basic needs to build up more choices for themselves. We see them providing healthcare, giving everyone the basic needs to overcome illness and continue to make choices in their lives. We see them providing social welfare and housing, giving everyone the basic needs to build up choices for themselves from the bottom. And the minimum wage does just that. It provides the same level of choice for those who are employed. It is a store of choice. And the fact is, ladies and gentlemen, today money is choice. If you want to do pretty much anything in our society today, you're going to need money of some form or another. Now the proposition, they've been saying the government has the duty to protect jobs, and yes, that is true. But why? Well, jobs are important, of course, because they help us earn money. They help us earn a higher level of choice in life. But the proposition, they're putting forward jobs themselves as some form of be-all and end-all. They're putting the needs before the actual reason why they exist in the first place. They would reduce everything a person is just to the job they do, and in that they are ignoring the very purpose of having a job in the first place. Now, moving on. Moving on. What other duties does the government have? Well, obviously, to look after us, to protect us from harm. Now, we see them fulfilling this every day as well. That's why there are many laws against rape or murder or assault, and that's why these laws are so heavily enforced. But by abolishing the minimum wage, the government will be failing in their duty to protect us. How? Well, they'd be allowing people to be exploited, directly against what the proposition have been saying. Because these people's level of choice will be drastically reduced. And we must not forget, ladies and gentlemen, that people who are working on minimum wage come from the sections of society that are most vulnerable to exploitation. Perhaps those who are poor, who have no alternative. People who are poor, who have no alternative but to work for this meager pay. Those who may not be well educated or who have language barriers, who wouldn't be able to accurately represent themselves in the case of exploitation or inequality. And we know for a fact, ladies and gentlemen, that there are another group who have disproportionately benefited because of minimum wage, and that's women, ladies and gentlemen. Throughout history, and even today, women have been paid much less than men, but minimum wage has guaranteed them a fair and equal level of pay in our society. And the government has the responsibility to protect these vulnerable groups more so than others. Why? Because in the sense, ladies and gentlemen, they've already failed. I'll take you in a second. They've already failed to ensure that everyone gets an adequate education. They've already failed to prevent them from becoming so desperate that they'd be willing to work for anything. The proposition, the first part particularly said people wouldn't get exploited, but the fact is they will. Why? Because it's easy for employers to exploit them. It's easy for employers to pay them less, or to replace them with someone else, because of the low-skilled nature of their labour. Yes, please.
And there's already worker legislation in place to protect people from being judged based on their gender.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but the fact is, I did bring up this point earlier, the fact that people will choose to work despite the conditions, and I'm going to deal with that in a second. So, now of course, the government also have the duty to protect us from harm, even if this harm would come as a result of our own bad choices. They try to stop us from making decisions that will limit our choice in the future. And we see them doing this every day. It's why drugs are illegal. If you become addicted to drugs, you will lose your control of that choice-making process. It's why prostitution is illegal. If you sell your body to someone else, then of course you're giving them control of your choice-making process. And it's why they try to prevent suicide accidents. They try to prevent that one decision whereby you will have no further choices in the future. Now the proposition, they have been saying that as long as someone is willing to work for this low wage, then that's fine. But they're talking nonsense, ladies and gentlemen. We're not going to listen to them. Why? Because this person's choice will be severely limited as a result of this bad decision to work for less. Now, second problem, they've also said that people will refuse to work for these low wages. And this is also nonsense, and I'm going to get to this, I swear. Why? Well, in our society, that defines people by the jobs they do. Well, then, of course, people will be willing to work for anything just to get that job. When our society places so much pressure on the superficial concept of just having a job, then of course people will do anything just to say that they have one, without being able to properly weigh the consequences of that bad decision. And they say, no, this is just the kind of bad decision that the government must prevent us from making. It is the government's duty, it's the government's duty to prevent us from making decisions like this. And they would fail in that duty to protect us from this decision should they abolish the minimum wage. No, thank you. Now, finally, I just want to look at the proposition's view that an individual's bad choice to work for less will only affect themselves. Now, there are many bad choices in society that there are many choices that not only will harm you, but can harm others as a result. For example, if I'm locked, I can't drive. Why? Well, of course, because I can hurt myself, but of course, because I can harm others. I can kill others in the car. And in the same way, ladies and gentlemen, your decision to work for less will harm others. Your decision to work for less, whereby you have a lower level of choice, will lower other people's choice. Well, how, you say? Well, now, supposing we have a guy who's working a super rally for €8 an hour, and he's content working €8 an hour. That's the level he thinks his way of labour is worth. Then another guy comes in, and he offers to work in his position for €4 an hour. Well, what's going to happen? The €8 an hour guy must now work for at least €4 an hour if he wants to keep his job. And this is what abolishing minimum wage will cause, ladies and gentlemen. It will cause a spiral of wage and good cutting. It will cause a competition of people all working for less and less just to get that one job. It will cause a scramble of desperate people all trying to prove that they are worth the least. The government has the duty to prevent this from happening. The government has the duty to maintain the minimum wage. Because money is choice, and choice is a basic life value. Because the government exists to protect us from our own bad decisions and to protect us from exploitation. And because we do not want a downward spiral of people trying to prove their worthlessness. So for those reasons, ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to oppose this ridiculous motion.
Good afternoon, everyone. As you've heard, my name is Andrew Ford from Plastic Notch, and today I'm here, as you may have guessed, to propose a motion. So, what I'm going to do for you today is, I'm going to look back a little bit on the economics of the first so far, and put a little bit of a different spin on it. I'm also going to bring you something new. I'm going to bring you future potential earnings. But before I even go into that, I think there's need for a rebuttal. For a rebuttal on Austin's speech. He talked about choice. He spoke about how choice was great, and I could not agree with him more. I thank him for making that speech, because we say, ladies and gentlemen, that choice is great. Choice for the individual is great. Now, if I want to work for €5 an hour, the state says I can't do so, even though the Constitution states that I should not be prohibited from working. The thing is, they're restricting my choice, and also they're criminalizing me, and they're making me vulnerable, because now I cannot report to the state if I am being not treated well. I cannot report to the state if my employee is chaining me up in chains and beating me every second Friday. I can't do so, ladies and gentlemen, because the state does not acknowledge me. He also did some math. He did some great math, ladies and gentlemen. He talked about super value or those sorts. I'm not quite sure. But what he said was, if there's one person working in super value, and then the minimum wage is abolished, and 2 people start working in super value, that to me sounds great, because that to me sounds like there's less unemployment. So, let's jump into it. Let's jump into the economics. This basically is the nature of regulation. That's what it comes down to. Now, I'm going to make a statement. The minimum wage is bad, okay? The minimum wage is bad because it's bad for business. Labor is a commodity. If there's no demand for labor, ladies and gentlemen, there should not be a hyped up price for labor. No, thank you. Let's look at it a different way. Labor should be seen as a commodity. A tape recorder, ladies and gentlemen. If there is demand for a tape recorder is expensive. But the state should not force up the price of a tape recorder now that we have CDs. It shouldn't do so because it is interfering with the markets, because it is not allowing for an open market, ladies and gentlemen. The natural balance between wage and demand for wage will occur because that's an open market. But if you ramp up the price of labor, then you restrict its sale. Then you restrict employment. And that's not a good thing. That's not good economics. They may have you believe that it's good for the economy when people are unemployed. No, thank you. But that's simply not the case. The reality is, the more people you employ, the better off the state is. Because that employment, it's good for the economy, it's good for growth, it's good for taxation, and it's good for employment, ladies and gentlemen. No, thank you. The artificial minimum wage is around $7.65. Market economics says that I should get 3 people for that price. But because I can't afford it, because the government doesn't let me allow to pay these people a lower wage, I must only take 1 person. That means 2 people leaves out. That 1 person is skilled. But what I'm doing is I'm blocking the unskilled and uneducated from even getting on the ladder. It gives no thank you. It gives businesses absolutely no incentive. And as I've stated, it criminalizes people who choose to work for less. The reality of this is that this affects small businesses. I mean, that's where we're at. Because this is something called the economy of scale. Big businesses can be more efficient and can have more people because they can absorb the cost of minimum wage. But the small and medium-sized, businesses, it affects them. It genuinely really affects them. And that really affects the economy because there's a lot more of them on every corner store than there are big multinationals. It takes away their profit margin and it takes away, it takes away their ability to employ. Employment at the moment, I'll say it from the West, is vital, ladies and gentlemen, it's vital. So, what I'm going to bring in now, yes please.
What's one increase in employment if the money that you earn isn't even enough to survive?
Firstly, that's something I disagree with because that's not economics. People will not work if they're not getting enough money to survive. Simple, open economic markets means people will work for money. And people will not work for a job if they're not getting enough to survive. That is simplicity. No thank you. So, potential future earnings. Now this is a long-term point, and I know that opposition hate long-term points because they think it stinks of Stalinism and it's all theoretical and it's painful. But in a way, they're like the government. They think very short-term. They think minimum wage is bad short-term, ladies and gentlemen. But what I want to do is I want to look long-term, ladies and gentlemen. I want to look into the future. Who does the minimum wage make happy? Economically, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't make sense, as we have proven. Who it really makes happy is the politicians, because this is a populist approach. The minimum wage allows for politicians to pretend they care for social justice. Politicians ramp up the comedy of labour, and this is a short-term gain. But long-term, you lose out. No, because it hides the ugly face of the economy, especially in Ireland that we have now, and it hides the face of capitalism. Basically, the minimum wage is a bone thrown to the housing masses. Now, this is the painful thing. If you get rid of the minimum wage, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure a small amount of people will suffer, and I concede that fact. But long-term, the gain for the nations and for the individuals is really, really great. No thank you. They can come up here and they can bring many stories of German hairdressers who can't afford to get a haircut, ladies and gentlemen. They can bring those stories. But what they fail to do, they achieve to do, is they achieve to ignore these countries. They achieve to ignore that the economic powerhouses, and it's not thank you, and that the future economic powerhouses of this state are coming from countries who have no minimum wage. It's like the balance of harms. If you have no minimum wage, you have a skilled populace who are used to work and who are forced to be productive. Now there's a bit of pain and a bit of suffering, but the context of this society, it's not India or China, it's Ireland. Employment is not just about money, and this is a radical, crazy point. Employment, ladies and gentlemen, is more than money. It's about skilling people. It's about people learning to learn skill. It's about the notion of working. It's about the work ethic and the self-esteem that it brings. And it's about the social structure of this country. People need to be employed because it gives them a sense of work and a sense of purpose. And unemployed people are the people who are known for depression and suicide. And by employing these people, you tackle those problems. And it also leads to education people. Because the minimum wage, they talk about the minimum wage, I'm not sure what I said, I'll say what I said. The minimum wage deters people from education because people who are unskilled can just go out in the workforce and say, oh, $7.95 an hour, why not? Why not leave school? Why not throw away my education? So, what we're saying that if you are not skilled, then you can either get your foot on the ladder or you can jump back into education and get skilled. What I've brought to you today, I look back on the economics and proved simply why we are fantastic and why they're not so good. And I also brought you an idea of potential future earnings. Long term, no minimum wage is better for the individual and the state. Or